and today we're going to talk about how to report bugs when you find something that doesn't work in specifically in the API. I'm going to be focusing on that today. And if it is something that, if you've had a lot of experience with the API, let's say, and it used to work a specific way and now it doesn't, and you're kind of questioning whether it's a bug or not, this is kind of the workflow that you would follow if it's something that exists in, let's say, the new product. So this video is going to kind of walk through the initial setup of how you go about, um, in this case it's about center lines on a drawing and dimensioning two specific objects on that center line. Let's in this case it would be the start and the end point of the center line. So the first thing you have to do is you kind of have to set up a data set, to be able to report this specific issue to the people that fix it. In this case, it would be Autodesk itself. It would be Autodesk product developers that will be looking at this to determine whether it's something that is intentional or it was a change that happened that happened in the past that caused this specific issue to occur in the current version. So for this specific data set, we have a little plate that has that's been extruded. We also have a plane that is on the left side of the plate, and there's also an attribute associated with this top face that will use that. And you can see that it's been attributed, and I just called it top face. In the drawing, I just have one view for this data set, and I can go ahead and I'll just delete that center line for now because the code will actually add it back, with, you know, added it to where, you can see it again. So let's go ahead and walk through the code that's here. So the thing that I'm trying to show is a discrepancy to what's going on. In the past, you were able to tell the dimensioning, create objects, create geometry intent for a specific dimension, and you were able to attach the dimension to a geometry intent that is associated with a start or an endpoint of the sketch line. You used to be able to do that. That was just standard, I guess, standard process now. In the current version, I have found that it infers which one that you're trying to attach it to. So, like, let's say you have a dimension here, and the center line was here. It will automatically, based off the text location, it will automatically attach to whatever endpoint of this is closest to the text. And when you move the text down here without changing anything, like without changing any objects, it will automatically associate it to the point, which is either the start point or end point, to the whichever one that's closest to the text. And I will show that in this little bit of code. Okay, so let's go ahead and walk through the code. And we can kind of like just show what's going on. So we create an active document. The active document in this case is a drawing document. We are creating objects for the plate doc and the plate def, which is the component definition of the part document that's associated with this drawing document. We're creating an object for the sheet and the active view, which in this case we only have one view, so I'm just saying it's the first view that I find. If you have multiple views, you're going to have to iterate to which one you're associated with, whether it's depending on view type, whether it's side, top, base, either one, or whether it's associated with a specific location, or if it's on a specific sheet you're trying to find. You'll have to do that to get the specific view you're associating, this workflow with. So the next one is I'm trying to create create an object based off the work plane. And since I named the work plane left side, it's just the definition, or the component definition dot work planes, and then you give it the name associated with that work plane, and it'll create the work plane for you. So now that work plane has something. If you look down here, you can see that it's called left side, so it's the active one. And then continue to step through the code. You see that it visually turned it, so we included the work plane on the view, and then we also turned the visibility on the work plane. If you don't want the visibility on the work plane, you'll have to turn it off after you create the dimensions. That's one thing that I've learned a little bit over time, is you have to make sure that whatever objects you're dimensioning to are visible on the sheet. So whether it be like work points or work planes, make sure when you do include them, you do turn them on visually so you can do the dimensioning, and then after you get done with all the dimensioning, then you can turn them off, and it's just that work plane object, or the center line object from that work plane, dot visible equals false. So in this case, we want to also create a centerline object so we can reference the endpoint start point. And that is just, you're going to use the active view and its parent, which is actually the sheet. So I could have done active sheet in that case, dot centerlines, dot add by work feature. And then you give it the work plane, and you give it the view associated with that work plane. So that will create the left centerline object. And then there's two different versions of this that I'm going to kind of walk through. One is creating point 2Ds off of the centerline points. There's two different ways that you can actually create geometry intent for this specific instance. You can give it 2 points associated with the endpoint start point of the centerline. Or you can use something called a point intent enum, which is an enum that holds specific point values. In this case, it would be endpoint intent or start point intent. So I am showing in this specific instance that both of these do not work. And that's usually good practice to say, okay, well, if there's multiple ways to do this, you can do it this way and you could do it this way, and both come to the same solution, where in this case they're just not working. It's usually good practice to kind of show that if that is the case. If it's not the case and one works over the other, then that's good information to also give to the product team to make sure that you are actually showing the differences and making sure that that one is working versus the other. So the first version that I'm going to do is I'm going to create 2.2Ds off of the start point and end point of the center line. So now those have values, and then I'm going to create the geometry intent from those points. So that is just, you create the view, and I could have done the parent here, or the sheet here, dot create geometry intent, give it the center line, and then give it the point associated with the center line you're trying to create the intent from. And then do the same thing for the start intent. So we're going to skip version 2 for now, and we'll come back to it. The next thing, you need to create a point 2D for the location of the text that you're trying to place, the location of the text you're trying to place the dimension from. So in this case, it's just a create point 2D, which you use the transient geometry for that. And then I also want to create a geometry intent from the face that we are referencing. So you get top face intent, and I created this little function to return the geometry intent for that top face. And for this function, you give it the plate document and the view associated with the face that you're trying to reference, and it will return the geometry intent. The next thing you have to do is you have to give it a coordinates. In this case, it's just a set of doubles that you give it either the endpoint or the start point of the center line to kind of place. Well, this would be the text location, the X and Y coordinates for the text location. And then you use the point 2D and put point data and then give it the coordinates. And then the next thing is to create the linear general dimension. And that's just the active sheet dot drawing dimensions dot general dimensions dot add linear. And in this case, we want to do the point location for the text, then the first intent associated with the dimension, and then the second intent associated with the dimension, and then what type of dimension you give this. If you don't put anything in there, I believe the default is aligned. So if you want anything other than aligned, make sure that you define which one you're wanting in that case. So we will go ahead and do that. So in this case, you see how the dimension, let's extend this out a bit so we can kind of see where the center lines are, or the center line is, I mean. So it's associated with this a center line. This point associated with the center line is what it's attached to. So let's create another dimension, and then let's change this intent to be the start intent, which we talked about a little bit ago. The start intent referencing the start point of the center line. You see how that is. It's referencing this one. So, and that's referencing the start point. So usually when that happens, when you change the intent, it doesn't matter where the text is located on the around the view, it's going to attach to that intent no matter what text location that you put it in. So in this case, we did change the start intent, or the end intent, to start intent, and we're going to run it again. Okay, and now you see that there's an additional dimension here, but it is also referencing that intent that's closest to the dimensions, even though I gave it a different end of the center line. In this case, it should have changed it to down here, referencing this endpoint, and then the text location would still be here. The dimension would still be up here, but you would see like a leader that came down to this endpoint, and in this case, that's not happening. So let's try the second way. So instead of doing the points, the point 2Ds, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it the point intent enum, which is the endpoint K endpoint intent and K start point intent. And I will just comment this out for now because I don't want to set it twice. And let's say, go back to the endpoint. And okay, so that one is referencing this point up here of the center line. And then let's change it back to the start intent. And play, and you see how it's referencing the same geometry intent of the center line. So let's do something a little different. Instead of changing the intent, we will keep the intent the exact same. So we'll just leave it the way that it is, the start intent. And instead of doing that, let's change this to be the start point Y. And then let's go ahead and play. Okay, so you see how we finally got it to attach to this end of the center line, which is the start point of the center line. And then let's change it to the end point. And push play. And you see how it's now attached to this other end. So what I found was you could do that. You could change the text location of the text location to let it just auto attach to the closest intent associated with the center line. But that's not always what you want in the way of like development. Sometimes you do want it to attach to, especially for like angles, you want it to attach to maybe this end and let the leader define where that line is across your component. That's kind of how I ran into this. I was playing around with different endpoints, and I was like, oh, that's not working anymore. So that's not always the case, that you want to attach it and then use the leader to come across. So like in this case, it would be like, let's say you may want to attach it to this end, but you want the leader to go all the way attach. Oh, if you move it, it auto moves it for you. So that's another thing. You want the leader to kind of come all the way across. So like if you want to attach it, I don't think you can even attach it to that other end. You can't. Okay. So that's good to know that you can't even manually change it to the other end. That's good to know. So this is just step one in the process of creating the data set associated with it. A lot of times I'll record the entire process in the current version that I have. In this case, it's the 2026 version. I go through and record the entire process and kind of explain the steps and what I did to create the data set, to recreate the problem. And then I will also use that to upload it into the reporting tool that Autodesk has. So this is step one. Stay tuned for step two in the process. Thank you.